Hello, I'm Chris from Discount Aquarium Fish and Reef. Today in this video we're going to talk about cleaning, disinfecting, and keeping coral healthy that you're getting ready to put into your tank. The first step when you get coral, it's either going to be in a colony form on a rock, or it's going to be a frag plug or a small rock with frags on it. The first thing you're going to do when you get it is you're going to inspect that coral. Particularly with leather corals, mushrooms, whatnot, you're going to want to look on the underside of those mushrooms and the top and the leathers, mainly looking for flatworms. You can look up online and see what a flatworm looks like, and those are generally going to show up on your leather corals first. You should also, once you have a tank running with coral, inspect your leathers, inspect your mushrooms, inspect your coral, and watch for those flatworms if they do develop, because treating them right away is important, because when they die they are toxic and you don't want to have a huge colony of them to need to deal with. So you want to catch that before it gets out of hand. You're also going to be looking for whether there's large patches of hair algae or whether there's flat green algae growing on the plugs. That we're going to want to take off, which we'll talk about in a moment. You're also going to want to look for whether there's any aptasia, and sometimes you need to hold that coral under the water, see if you see any aptasia on it. If there is aptasia, I like to go ahead and take that off first. I will put the coral into a water container, leave it for a little while, watch for those aptasia to be able to see them easily. Get some Aptasia RX or get some any kind of Aptasia killer. They will all come with a needle applicator. Go ahead and kill off those Aptasia by smothering them with the liquid that they give you, and let that sit for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then it's fine to scrub it off afterwards. It's already managed to do its job. So first off, we've got a little colony here. This has some green slimers. Of course, they're not out because I picked it up out of the water. This yellow sponge, not really a huge problem there if you don't want it. It can be scrubbed off. This particular piece had a lot of hair algae on the side here. Big clumps of it, you're just going to want to pull them off to start with. So I go ahead and pull those off. And then you're going to want to have a small container that you put hydrogen peroxide in. You'll want to have a couple of scrub brushes, a toothbrush. When you buy these, try and buy one that says stiff bristles. I know the dentists recommend the soft, but stiff's going to work better for our application. You can also buy a larger bathroom scrubber that can be used on larger rocks like this. When I have that hair algae or whatnot, I'll go into, this is just tank water where this piece came out of, and I'll use my bigger brush to go ahead and scrub that algae off of the rock. Then I like to take my smaller toothbrush and the hydrogen peroxide, I'll tip it off a little bit, get the excess off. The areas of the rock that do not have coral on them, I generally just give them a small scrub down with the brush that's got that little bit of hydrogen peroxide. Doesn't matter if you get a little bit of this on some of the coral, that's not going to hurt anything, but I would go around thoroughly and take care of that, and then dip that rock back down in the water. That's going to dilute that hydrogen peroxide and get it off of that rock. If you have small frags, like this one, they're closed up, but it's got some candy cane coral on it. Usually look around, see if you see anything out of the ordinary that you want to get off of there. Any small worms, any algae build up on there. You just use your toothbrush and you'll go ahead and brush the areas of the frag plug or rock that don't have the coral. Usually on a frag plug, you'll have an area. This one's got a couple little shrooms on there. You'll have an area that doesn't have the coral on it on that plug, and you can go ahead and hit that with the peroxide just to to get some of that algae off that might grow on that plug. Once you've gone ahead and cleaned those corals with your brushing and your hydrogen peroxide, you're going to use a product for dipping. I like to use the Two Little Fishes Revive. It smells nice, seems to work well, but there are all different brands of coral dip. You're going to put the proper amount in a container with the tank water. You can do that same container that you had since you placed the corals in this other container. And then you're going to want to put the corals in that container, and you're going to want to dip them for the recommended time. It's usually about 15 minutes. Then you'll rinse them well, and they'll go into your tank. Now, as far as placing your coral in the tank, you're going to want to look at a few things. One is flow, one is lighting, and the other is proximity to other corals. If the coral that you're putting in is one that tends to put out sweeper tentacles, which can sting other corals, and you'll be able to find this. Always look your corals up online. Just type in the word acropora care or something like that, and you will go ahead and find out what kind of lighting that coral likes, whether it has sweeping tentacles, whether what kind of flow, which is the third thing that we're going to look at for the coral. Then when you position it in your tank, you can try and locate a spot that has the proper flow, that has the proper lighting, whether it's low, medium, high. You can have it in a shaded area. You can have it over to the side more. Some corals prefer to be placed on the sand bed. Some are fine up on the rock. Your sand bed corals are usually things like bubble corals that when they move, they can get damaged if they're on the rocks. So they're going to be down in the sand bed rather than up on the rock. Some other corals you don't want on the sand bed, particularly your chalices and montes, things that don't like to have dust and things settling on them. Best to keep them up somewhere mounted. They're very light, so sometimes you have to use some super glue gel or other coral glue to glue those to the rocks so that they won't just blow away with the water movement, because with your montes and whatnot, you do want some movement to keep that dust and whatnot from settling on them. Now, a lot of people ask, do I ever dip my corals after they're already in the tank? And the answer to that is yes. If you have corals that are doing well, and you haven't changed lighting, haven't changed their position, haven't changed water movement, possibly think about if you've added some other corals, because I usually like to mention your leather corals and your mushrooms. The reason, mostly the leathers, that some people don't have them in a tank with your LPS is they tend to do some chemical warfare. And one in particular, euphyllias in a tank with big leathers often don't do well because they're very susceptible to that chemical warfare that might come from those leathers. So you want to think about when you're adding leathers and whatnot, and whether you want to add them based on the other corals that you have in that tank. If you do run any coral that does any sort of chemical warfare or whatnot, do run carbon in the filter. That will help to dissipate the effects of that. If it gets out in the water, the carbon will start removing that. Back to, should I ever dip a coral once it's already in the tank? The answer is yes, sometimes. If you notice the coral is going downhill and you haven't changed anything, your feeding regimen hasn't changed, your water movement, your lighting, then you may want to pull that coral out if you're able to pull it out, if it's not on a huge rock or something. Go ahead and use your coral dip, go through a dipping process. One coral in particular that you should have on a regular routine about every month or two to dip is Gonophora. It tends to be susceptible to any amount of cyanobacteria. So if you get that in your tank, you're going to want to take care of that right away with methods for getting rid of cyano, one of which is Kline, the other red and blue slime and whatever kind of slime removers you can use, but most people use the Kline. But sometimes there's a little bit of cyanobacteria that hasn't really developed that can really cause problems with Gonophora. So I recommend about every month or two going ahead and pulling your little gono out, and it's usually on its own rock skeleton, so it's not attached to something and you can pull it out. Going ahead and dipping that. I should also mention, when we talked about these, and particularly on the leather corals, because that's really only where you're going to be able to see them. If you do see flatworms on the coral that you're putting in the tank, go ahead and wipe them off, and go ahead and get some flatworm exit or other flatworm treatment, and go ahead and treat those before you put them in the tank. And you'll want to have that on hand, because people eventually sometimes do see flatworms in their tank and need to get them taken care of, like I said before they get really large populations. So you'll be able to save that flatworm exit and have it for that purpose. That's pretty much it as far as disinfecting your coral. You want to do it every time you buy coral, even if the shop says, we just dipped them or whatever. You want to inspect them, clean them, disinfect them with some coral dip. Think heavily about their placement in the tank, and then after that, monitor your coral well in case it needs different feeding, in case it needs to be moved to a different location in the tank, in case it develops flatworms or starts going downhill when nothing else changed and you want to go ahead and dip it. Doing these things will really help you to be successful with coral. Of course, your water parameters, that's another thing. If your coral's going downhill, you want to definitely make sure, even if it's not, that your water parameters are correct. And with coral, the big ones are your calcium, your alkalinity, and particularly with SPS, your magnesium. Not quite, generally tends to not go down that much and need as much testing in your LPS and softy tanks, but the calcium and the alkalinity, big thing, number one. Thank you very much for watching. If you do ever have any questions for us, look us up online, Discount Aquarium Fish and Reef. We've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, we've got a website, we've got YouTube channel. Go ahead and get us any questions you may have. If you have a topic you'd like us to review further in an article or possibly do a video on, let us know that, and we'd be glad to help. Thank you for watching.